Here we go. We are officially recording. Hang on. Turning stuff off. Good to go. How do you feel?
I'm okay.
Yeah, you're all full of COVID still?
Yep. I'm I'm like I'm for sure day 8 after having it. So I think I don't know. Just tired. Getting my smell and
Wow.
taste back though,
Dude,
which
that's good.
is
I talked to a guy who is like 5 or 6 months in and doesn't have his taste back.
I don't know how long it'll be till it's completely back, but I can actually taste something once in a while. Like or at
That's
least I'm
weird.
pretending I can. It's like I'm
Right.
like, oh that tastes good. I'm like, or am I just thinking that because I know it's good?
Your brain is just remembering how it tastes.
Sarah made this really awesome pork loin. I was like, so I was like, I'm like, I swear this is awesome. I think it's really good. It tastes delicious, but I know I'm not 100% for sure, but
Right.
you know, I'm, I'm eventually going to be back. So I'm guessing you have Sunday again,
Yeah. Yeah. I'll
and,
I'll
and,
take Sunday.
but, I'm planning on December 6th.
I
So
mean, that's
yeah,
the important. I've actually been telling people I'm not like glad you got it, but but the thing is, the timing is pretty freaking good. So
it actually hasn't been bad. Like my kids only missed like really 2 days of school because of the timing of Thanksgiving and everything.
sure, sure.
And they're on the hybrid, whatever. So no, it's been awful. And now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I could actually just go on an airplane and it'd be just fine. Or
Yeah.
I could go, I can go places and kind of be okay, which is kind of weird to even think.
No, I
Like,
mean that's part of it too. Is like so if we both got it at the same time, things would be really difficult at church. But like even if I got it today, well, no, I mean I should not get it through Sunday. That'd be important.
yeah, if you can make,
Um,
I mean, I think I'm officially okay by Saturday or Sunday,
right.
but I, yeah, there's no need to rush back if I don't need to.
Right.
But
And then if I get it, you're good to go. I mean, it's like I said, the timing is it's not bad. So good
no,
work.
no, I'm just tired, man. I'm sleeping like I'm sleeping 9 hours at night. I'm taking 2 hour naps. So I'm
Oh my
sleeping like
gosh.
11 hours a day right now, and
Jeez.
it's whatever. But
Yeah, that's not normal for you at all.
I mean, I'm kind of old, and I don't mind a nap every so often. But I'm usually like
You're-
6, 7 hours, and maybe so I'm getting like 7 hours total. Maybe I'm getting like 4 hours more than that. It's just weird. Anyway,
Yeah.
so well, I'm glad we're doing this. I miss it. I suggested 2 topics because next a week from well, the Tuesday next Tuesday is Giving Tuesday, which is why I thought maybe we should talk about giving. Um, is this going to air
Yeah.
to when's this air? This
Tonight. I'm
airing
gonna
today?
upload it tonight. Yeah.
So I don't know if this is an appropriate time to give the kind of because I'm already seeing all this the giving right. There's the Black Friday, the Cyber Monday, the Giving
Yeah.
Tuesday. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, or do you want to save that until next week after everybody's given to their toxic charities, or do
That's
you want to?
yeah, no, it's a good call. And I actually think that's a good idea to do giving. And it's more than just toxic charity. It is um being
I know. I
charitable.
just say that it triggers my family every time I even say those words. So
It's because you're a true believer now. Like I had you read a book and you were like, ah, this is true. It's
I
the new
know.
gospel.
I looked up the notes again. Found a good WordPress site that kind of encapsulates everything. And like, yep. And so anyway, I'm initiating hopefully a service opportunity for our church right now. So I've
Saw
been
that,
running
yeah.
it through the filter,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, this is appropriate. Maybe we can talk about that and the good and the bad and why. And so, if everybody's wondering, Luke and I are talking about the book. Well, there's a couple of them. One's called Toxic Charity. And the other one is How to Help the Poor Without Hurting Them or Yourself. I think it was called.
Yeah.
And I think that one's actually more appropriate for the American church, probably. It's got some more granular nuts and bolts things that congregations can do to be more aware and participate in human development.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of premises there. So when's the last time you went through that book, Luke? And you make all your mission people go through it, right?
I do. And I will reread all of the same books every year. So when I go on the mission trips, I mean, I don't do it for both. I usually do 2 trips a year. I don't do it for both trips. But when we pull the people together and start doing the training, I just sort of grab my copies, skim through, partially just to have the stories, especially in Toxic Charities, just gives a lot of really good examples of real world stories where you're like, so I like to be able to reference those in the meetings to say like, yeah, take a look at this, or just think about this for a second. So
So
yeah,
I have two exact scenarios that would have come up in Toxic Charity that were in my face in the last 2 days. So
why
I'm
don't you
very
start
curious what
by
your take on this.
yeah, why don't you
Okay.
start by giving why don't you give like a brief synopsis of the concept of
Okay.
Toxic Charity?
So toxic charity, or when helping hurts, the idea is that traditionally well-meaning people, especially us white Westerners, have gone about the business of trying to help those who are disadvantaged or poor, whether in our country or abroad or wherever. And the negative effects have been deep and widespread. And these books illustrate essentially why our desire to help is actually hurting people, why it actually might cause harm, that it actually might hurt the cultures we're going into. And that underlying all of this, it's very damning to let us know that our motivations were primarily selfish. We were doing it to make ourselves feel better and not actually helping the people we're trying to help. Aware and unaware of these consequences. So these books are a good job of just bringing light to like, that's a well-meaning thing, but here is something negative that has and continues to happen because of it. Really illustrates the negative effects of short-term missions, the negative effects of not developing humans, making them dependent. It has like almost like kind of like a 10 commandments kind of thing of what you should use as guiding you, whether you should or should not help someone, and what does that look like. So if someone has not read either or both of these books, that is participating in all giving or serving the poor in any capacity, it is a must read.
Absolutely.
And every time I bring it up to people who have not read the books, I sound stupidly offensive and mean.
Yes.
And
And that's so hard. The books don't sound that way. It's just they had the
no,
opportunity to write and be careful when like you're in a conversation with somebody and you say, well, we really want to be careful with how we do charity and how we give because you can end up doing more harm. People immediately are like, no, I'm a good person, I'm not harming anybody, I do good. And
yeah,
like you start to explain to them like, well, you think you do, but like if there's a chance that you don't, then they get offenses so quick. It's so easy.
yeah. And I'm
On
not,
topics like
I'm
this.
not, I'm not very tactile, especially around people I love. So,
True. Yeah, you're
so
supposed to be the one that everybody loves. I'm supposed to be the bad guy. I'm bad
well, this
passive.
is in my family. This is in my family. They're
Okay.
allowed to, hate me how they want. So that's
Yeah. So
totally cool.
the key is that I always kind of boil things down to um, the issue of dependency and codependency and
Yes.
chronic versus crisis. So when you're trying to do something, you're giving towards something that is a chronic, ongoing issue. Homelessness oftentimes is a chronic, ongoing issue where somebody has been homeless for 20 years. And if you are driving down the highway, you get off on the off ramp, and as you're pulling up to the stop sign, there's a guy standing there with a sign, and the sign says, "Any little thing helps. God bless you." When you put money in a hat or a bucket, you've essentially just reinforced that this is a meaningful endeavor. There is some value in being here at this corner, and you've given them an opportunity to continue to be homeless. Um, and but see, homelessness is not always the case.
No,
somebody's house starts on fire. Okay, that's a crisis. That's not
it's a
chronic.
crisis.
That's not chronic homelessness. That is. So would you be right to be like, dude, I will cover a week of you being in a hotel room? So it's a crisis. It is charitable. It is very good, and you're not enabling them to live in a hotel for the next 20 years. You're solving a short-term crisis situation versus a chronic ongoing situation. So that's in my mind, asking those questions are the biggest questions to ask in a specific scenario, because you really do end up doing long-term damage. I'll never forget. So I did one Africa trip before I started to understand this, and I want to be clear to everybody. Like I'm not the brilliant guru who like discovered all of this and has taught living faith. I was the numbskull who did a foreign mission, short-term mission, completely wrong.
I've been there. I did it too.
And then when we went back the first time to, hang on, what would you put in the chat room?
I just put the chat, like, here's mantras.
Ah, gotcha.
So you can reference those later.
Later, I got this enlightenment from a guy named Shawan Trump. He's a pastor, missionary in Kenya, and we were going to go through them to do a mission trip. And he said, first read these books, and we're going to have lots of conversations before you even think about getting on a plane. And he opened my eyes to it. So it's really him. But the first trip I was on, I was sitting there looking around at like the huge need in Africa, all of the problems. We're trying to fix problems. And the two things that stood out for me on that trip were, number one, I was having a conversation with a guy, and he said, oh, Africa is littered with white man's good intentions. Meaning like empty buildings and things that were started. And you can still see it like in the refugee camp. There's the one that really stuck out to my wife is this building that's got a sign on it that says occupational therapy in a refugee camp. Like, oh, I know
he's an occupational therapist, right?
Yes. And my wife just laughed and shook her head, and she goes, I know. She sees all of the opportunities to do occupational therapy in that refugee camp, but it's not sustainable. It's not the primary need. These are people who are hungry and dying from cholera, and you're gonna like teach them how to tie their shoes better. Like it just shoes they don't have, by the way, probably.
That's one charity I want you to address is the shoe.
Yeah, there you go.
I just saw the shoe that fits ministry.
So we'll get to that in a minute. But
we'll get to that.
The other one was when, what my team on that first trip really wanted to build a house for somebody and like wanted to do physical work, something like that. And there was this lady who needed a new house. So we were going to then pay for that new house, which is only be like $600. But we wanted to do some of the work. So my group of people, a couple of guys, a couple of gals, had to sit there and spend a lot of time learning how to build the house and then helping build the house. And I looked over and there was a group of people standing off in the distance. And I said, who are those people? And they said, well, they are the builders who usually build the house. But since you're building the house, I was like, so we just unemployed. Like we just fired all of those people because we really wanted to build a house. Yes. And I went, and I didn't know
and
the
you
phrase.
Sabotaged their economy. And besides the worker economy, you sabotaged it by purchasing all the materials too.
Yeah. So we literally did everything wrong. I had no concept of what toxic charity was. I only, at that moment, felt gross. That's all I can tell you is I was like, this isn't right. There's got to be a better way to do this. And then years later, I discovered, there actually is. So
you, the one in the book that you just reminded me of is the well thing, right? Everybody's like, oh, let's make wells in Africa. It seems like a really good idea because just clean water raises life expectancy like 20 years. Just seems like a really low-hanging fruit. Problem is, they're the white guys' wells.
Yep.
And so when the well breaks, there's nobody there that knows how to fix them. It's not their well. They're going to wait for the white guy to show up again.
Yep.
And they're going to go right back to where they were before. Again, didn't nothing about human development. It was not owned by the people there. It was very much created this dependency relationship long term,
Yes. Exactly right.
and it's been done over and over and over and over, and it continues to be done. And even bring these things home, we see these things done now. And like I just saw the governor's thing on coronavirus. They had the woman from the food bank of Iowa, and I'm
Hmm.
like, that's a toxic charity. And of course, my family's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, we don't have a food problem in Iowa. There's tons of food. It's a money problem. And we're trying to do something like, here's some food. It's just shifting the arrangements, right? And
Right.
this, the book, When Helping Hurts, does some very tangible things to help food banks transition from being more of a toxic charity into one that actually helps humans develop, makes cooperatives, makes people contribute to their own gain, right? They have to
Yes.
purchase membership, or they have to put hours in. They have to have some skin in the game, and it becomes their food bank, not the food bank of Iowa. And it's a huge shift. Now the people like you and I who would show up there and volunteer, we aren't running this place. The poor are
Right.
running it. And we are not better than them, because as soon as you start going down this path of, you get, I love this in the notes. If you give once, you elicit appreciation. You give twice, you create anticipation. You give 3 times, you create expectation. 4 times, it becomes entitlement. 5 times, you establish dependency.
Yep.
And so as soon as you establish dependency, this hierarchy view of I'm the giver, you're a receiver, you've just hurt the human condition. These books are great at illustrating humans are not just stuff, which is what we
Hmm.
like to do in the West. Give them stuff and they'll be fine. It talks about they are spiritual beings, they are physical beings, they are emotional beings, and their relationship with creation, relationship with others. You have to foster the whole human, or you're going to hurt them. If you
Yeah.
err on one side, you're going to hurt them. So to go in one way and not the others is going to probably cause harm. Again, this is something
Yeah.
in the West that we struggle with.
And it's degrading to, and it's caustic and degrading to the human spirit to find yourself in a ongoing dependent relationship when you are that person who, now you are the one who always needs help, and all that does is reinforce these negative things like, well, there must be something really wrong with you, you
Yeah.
really suck at this, and they're better than you. You suck at life, they're great at life, but they give things to you, and that's how this arrangement is. You are a lesser person. It's those things that we
It's awful. God, that's
unintentionally
awful.
yeah, and we unintentionally reinforce it. Nobody sets out to do that. We think that guy's hungry, give him some food. It makes some sense. It really does. So
Yes.
toxic charity
And
is
and
not.
if it's in a crisis situation,
Yes.
but they say in the book, one of the hardest things is transition from a crisis to chronic. My wife's cousin is running a food bank out in Colorado. They have people who are in crisis because of COVID.
Yeah.
And I and
Yeah.
I I go, hey, you need to read this book, because you're going to be transitioning from these crisis scenarios. You're going to be going back to the chronic issues that you've always had. Now is
Right.
a good time for your organization to reevaluate and try to transition itself out of crisis mode, and how to deal with the chronic issues surrounding the people here, and what can we do as an organization to support human development.
Yes, exactly
I
right.
hope she read.
And the crisis, that's why, like, I'm kind of halvesies on food banks. I always try to do my homework on it to see, are they tracking people? Are they saying to people, you come here this often, regularly, let us see if we can help you find work, employment, gainful wages, and like, if they're doing that, I'm good. Because yeah, there's always going to be somebody who in a crisis moment lost their job, or some financial ruin, or something happened to them and they need food, and that happens,
Yeah.
and a food bank is really good for that.
And so the discernment of crisis versus chronic, it depends on relationship, right? So really you're
Hmm.
talking about, does this organization develop or foster or care about relationships with the people who are participating? And
Right.
at what level do they encourage or equip them to essentially run the place?
Right.
Uh, that's the homework, that's the ugly, messy, it's so much nicer just to like, okay, so we're going to be working with the ministry. I think that is not toxic, which would be Agape Pregnancy Center. Okay.
Right.
I think they get it. They're about human development. In fact, they're just opening a new building that's going to be specifically for that. It's a space to help people learn how to do better, right? How to deal with being a single mom, or how to not get pregnant, how to deal with poverty, how to do job search, what skill they're having a whole wing, a whole branch of their ministry, which is just completely about developing humans. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a great thing. But you and I, Luke, don't participate directly in that ministry, right? We might. Our church is trying to figure out ways to partner with them. So as a leader in our church, trying to discern what's a good way to do this, I want to partner with an organization who gets it, who can create this barrier between me hurting and them helping.
Yeah.
And what does that look like to partner with people that do this all the time and are for the long game? And how can we take a long view? That's the key.
Right.
Take a long view of humans, not a short view.
Yeah, and I always say like one of the best cases or one of the best ways to test and see is a charity good? Is this a good situation? Or do they get it? They should be happy if they were put out of business by their own efforts. So if a food bank got to the point where they've developed a co-op, and now the people are taking it over and contributing themselves, the hours, they're getting grants, they're writing grant proposals, they're doing all of this thing, and the people themselves, like all of a sudden, like if the food bank of Iowa was like, we did such a good job that nobody needs to come to our food bank anymore, we have to close. Good. Like that would be great. Or Agape Pregnancy, if they did such a good job that people no longer had these unplanned pregnancies, they would have to close, and they would say, great, that's
awesome.
wonderful. It's not bad news. You have to close your doors. But if you walk into your average food bank and say, what if you had to close your doors tomorrow? They would be like, oh, that'd be terrible. So many people would be in need. Well, what if they weren't in need? There'd be like an uncomfortable, we know that's good, but then what would we do? Like, how would we? So then you go, oh, so it's about you and about you.
See, that's when we're happy. Jesus comes back. We no longer have to be pastors.
Yeah, it's exactly
we don't need
right.
Food banks either.
Imagine if we got to a point where in the church, everybody was just cooking on their own, taking classes, leading small groups, doing Bible study, getting all that stuff done. Hang on just a second. Yes, Gigi? Oh, you can watch a show for a little bit longer, okay? I'm teacher dad right now. So which is why I'm in my bed. It's the only quiet place in the house. I've got 6 kids doing online school. So anybody watching this who wants to try and get a hold of me, good luck. And also, I drink whiskey at 2:00 in the afternoon now because that's when school is over. So,
you know what COVID did? You missed it. The COVID, I couldn't taste anything, so I did try some hard liquor once, and I couldn't taste it. And I don't even like hard liquor.
So it's not really beneficial then. You got to taste it when you can taste it.
I was just like, I got to try this to see if this is actually like, it's horrible, but I couldn't taste it. So anyway,
it's hard for me to imagine. It's like one of those things like going blind or all of a sudden being colorblind, because I can't imagine. So like when you drink hard alcohol but have no taste buds or no taste whatsoever, it just burns your face.
It didn't even burn. It was like nothing. It was so it was. In fact, what I noticed is in general, like it felt like almost all of my receptors were dulled. Like all of my senses were been kind of dulled. Like even my just even feel has felt not the same for me. It's like it blocks. So I don't know, whoever can come up with a diet pill that blocks all taste and smell, it will work. Because I've lost like 8 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Just not eating a lot, because I've noticed like, oh, that tastes so good. Let me have some more. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm whatever.
All right,
Yeah, it's
back on
great.
toxic charity.
So let's back to topic. All right. But
Yeah.
so now once you become aware and you know that there's this potential for you to harm people that you're actually trying to help, um, if you if you continue blindly doing those things, that's really evil. Actually, you shouldn't want to hurt people. But it really gets down to the root was, what's my motivation? Oh, it was me. I was trying to make myself feel better about myself and not necessarily the person I'm trying to help. This is the chronic issue in the church and in
Yeah.
the West. And what's funny is, as we become more and more material rich, right, and there becomes less and less material need, then, well, this pelagialism, right? This this
Yeah.
I need this creation to give me opportunities to make myself better and better and more holy and holy. That's a Catholic teaching, right? That's a false,
Yeah.
and so this idea that I actually need something to plug myself into to make my life have worth. That's a scary thing. But there's people are, man, they're desperate for a reason to live, aren't they? They're like, I need
Yes.
to have a purpose. And sometimes my purpose is helping people. And as soon as you tell me my helping people is actually hurting them, you have just hit them in a really tough, hard spot of their identity, which is why
Yeah.
this is so, well, I'm glad you and I are talking about it and there's nobody else here. There's nobody watching this, I'm sure.
Well, that's so, like, if I tell you you shouldn't put money, out the window to that person standing on the corner when you get off the highway, if your first response is, I would feel so bad, that's a great indication. That is evidence to me you're doing this wrong. So what if you feel bad? That guy's homeless. Is the biggest problem you feeling bad? Really? In this scenario, he sleeps on the streets in the cold, but really you feel bad. So let's address you. That's so much more important as you're driving your Lexus, going to your
Another,
McMansion.
to address the homeless thing, I think I think Hope Ministries does a really good job, because they'll say, here's a bed, you come off the streets, but we're here, we really don't care about tonight, we care about you long term. And what is that going to help you long term? That means you're going to have to get off your drugs, you're going to have to learn how to coexist, you're going to have to contribute to the society here, you're going to have to be part of this, you're going to have some ownership and some skin in this game, and we're going to help facilitate that. We'll help you along the ways. This is in no ways going to be misconstrued as you show up here and it's a complete handout. We're here about developing the human, which takes a lot more work and a lot more effort. And God bless those people who are on this front line doing that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, again, Hope Ministries, the homeless shelter downtown, does a great job with this. And you can tell there are, and I've spent some time there, talking with the directors, and back when we used to do things, as a church, go places and see things. We
I'm
used
going
to
to
take.
Agape next on the 9th.
Good for you.
I'm going to visit since I'm COVID, whatever
Yeah.
now.
So when we go there, they would say, yeah, there will be people who, short-term crisis, is really cold tonight and I'm hungry, they will stay there. And then when they start to say, okay, now past this, whatever, there's a short-term couple of days maybe where you can just chill and relax. After that, we're going to put you to work. There are those men who go, nah, I don't want to do it. I don't want to. And so that's a person who has been on the receiving end of charity that is toxic so often that they're like, no, I'm going to go on the corner and somebody's going to give me some money. This will work. And they're right, is the problem. We
Yeah.
need fewer and fewer people to be participating in toxic charity, so that people don't get into these dependent and codependent relationships and get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to, at like some point, kind of make a little bit of a transition over to say, also remember that this is just good life application for yourself, because your charity is not just I give money to. Your charity is also things like, I've got this sibling who always calls me when they have something that they need. They need help with X, Y, Z. So if you're always the one who's rescuing and helping, you're just doing the toxic charity for, somebody you happen to grow up with. And
Which is why they need this book then, right?
Boundaries is such a good. I have recommended that book more than any book ever, and it
Notice
always
it's within arm reach.
Yeah, it's astonishing. That book is so good, and it's what is it, like 25 years old or something? I mean, it's been around for a
They
while.
just redid it, but it's still true.
Oh, there's
Again,
like 30
another book.
editions.
Yeah, and but it's another book that as soon as you bring up triggers some people.
Yep.
Because you know what, Pastor Bill did a really nice job. Remember, he preached on the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
And then he did okay, now what if this crisis scenario started to become chronic? Then what's that look like? Because the parable doesn't go that far, right? It just stops at the crisis mode, which everybody's like, oh yeah, crisis. Crisis is low-hanging fruit. And it gets dangerous when you try to go from crisis to chronic.
Exactly.
So he brought up the idea, what if he goes back to help this guy and he's not doing good, or he's being belligerent and he's getting kicked out. He starts doing wrong things. He starts doing harmful things to himself and others. Now what do you do? Right. Now you're talking about a chronic issue. You're talking about a long-term scenario. You're talking about something that's going to require time and relationship. And you're really going to have to create a thing where it does not create codependence or dependence or expectation thereof. And that is a much more difficult thing to deal with. Why didn't Jesus just keep going with that parable on that one?
Well, he had a certain specific point that was really outside of charity. So,
it was
Bill
more
did
about,
a nice job.
Yeah,
it was good.
But it's amazing how, what would Jesus do? And we're like, well, of course Jesus would X, Y, or Z. And you're
really?
like,
are you sure
really?
about that?
Are you sure about that? It's like, maybe the great thing is, and it talks about, we do live in a world where there is this reaping and sowing thing. It does exist. There is consequence both ways. Sometimes we get consequence of our sin that we feel like we don't deserve, but sometimes it's a direct result. Like, boy, I didn't do that, and that was the negative result. Like, I'm a teacher, and I've got deadlines tonight, and people are like, hey, I'm not going to get done on time, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, well, that was the same thing you did the week before, and the week before, and right? Now we have this crisis. It's a chronic issue now. It's not just a crisis. I did have somebody just say, I've got COVID. I feel like crap. I go and look. I'm like, wow, they have been working until like the last 24 hours. Okay.
Right.
This is a legitimate scenario. I'll work with them on these crisis scenarios, but it was the third time their grandma died this semester. Then I'm like, okay, maybe. That's been the joke, though. That COVID's taken over the dead grandma excuse for us college.
Dude, my grandma died when I was in college. I didn't miss a single thing. I broke down crying. Somebody was like, hey, I heard your grandma died. I'm in the lunchroom. I'm like, yeah. Get your stuff done. This isn't that complicated. Grandma died.
Yeah, but you're different, Luke. You're different.
I know.
There's a lot of people. But this is the same thing when helping hurts. For instance, I think when the first stimulus checks came out, I thought, when helping hurts, what have we done here? I'm sure there's some people that really need this. And there's a whole bunch of people like me who do not need this. Mm-hmm. And because this has nothing to do with relationships. It has nothing to do with human development. This has everything to do with our Western materialistic approach to solve problems, which is throw some money at it.
Throw some money at it. Exactly.
And this is exactly what we do. I'm like, well, this makes complete sense for the United States of America to do this. In fact, the fact that we haven't done it many times is kind of surprising to me, because this is the only way we know how to deal with problems is we throw money at it.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting thing is, does, for instance, an institution like the government have the ability or the discernment to do this work? Are they equipped to actually know humans, develop them at all different levels, spiritually, physically, emotionally, socially? I'm sure there's people within the organizations that are equipped to do that.
Yeah.
But how does that all work together?
Sure.
This is why Hope Ministries has that whole human in mind, with other humans to do the work with other humans.
Yeah.
It's great.
It takes, so there's like a certain amount of the energy required to do this right increases with the size and scale of what you're doing. So,
Yes.
as a congregation, that is a medium-sized church, it is still a bit of a struggle because I will be blunt and honest. There are times when somebody says, "Hey, we should give some money to this organization," where I've got so many things going on, where the temptation is just to be like, sounds good to me, go ahead, without vetting it, without looking into it, without finding out all of these things. Now imagine the government being like, okay, what we're going to do is try and solve the crisis for those people who are in crisis. So not Dan and the Petrock family, but like other people who are really in crisis. So how are we going to vet 300 million people? Like, you can't, you literally cannot do that. So it's
Come on, a Google form. Can't we just ask people, do you need help?
oh yeah, and nobody would lie and be like, yeah, I totally do.
I don't need. You keep your stimulus check. You're gonna get it from me later anyway.
I do not know how. I don't know how. On a scale, what the government could do, and again, this is harder. The bigger you get federally, you could say we are going to invest and look to design programs where we treat people as whole humans, and instead of doing, we like to disparagingly call it handouts or entitlements and stuff like that.
How does the UN do this? Is the UN any good at this? Or like you have the UN camps, the refugee camps, the World Food Bank. These are huge organizations. Do they have any clue about this stuff? They got to at some level, don't they?
No.
I don't. You've seen it firsthand in Africa.
Yeah. I've worked with the UNHCR a lot. And I will say that I've always had a very complicated relationship with them because on the one hand, if they weren't there, these 200,000 people would die in the wilderness. That's real. That is 100% real. On the other hand, what they're not doing is providing enough. People go hungry in the refugee camp so it's actually a useful description or useful case to look at with the Kakuma refugee camp is about 30, 40 years old, somewhere in there. It was in the 90s, early 90s, I think, or maybe, early 90s when the Sudanese crisis broke out. And that was the original catalyst for the Kakuma refugee camp. And their initial thought was get the resources together, get it to Kenya. Kenya then will give this chunk of land. They can all come here. We'll build a refugee camp. And the goal was to have that refugee camp for, I think it was less than 10 years. I think it was like less than 5 years, 30 plus years later. The initial crisis.
It's gotten no bigger, right?
Yeah, and it's like quadrupled in size. Now it's not just Sudanese. People from Burma, people from Ethiopia. So there's another one that popped up next door. Literally, there's about 25 yards separating Kakuma from Calliope. Why? Why is this? Because the UN, and here's what I tell people all the time, the UN is not, it's an organization and there's people in it, but there's not like warehouses and dormitories of UN people. When the UN wants to do something, what the UN basically is a big pile of cash. And they say to Kenya, hey, we'll give you part of this big pile of cash if you use it to open up a refugee camp. And so Kenya goes, okay, we'll take piles of cash. And then they open up a refugee camp. So it's not, it isn't, the UN is an organization. It is organized. It has those elements to it, but not like this high level of training in the UN where they deploy. Like when we talk about deploying white hats and blue hats in the UN, there's not a UN country. It's not a place where these people live. So when you deploy the white hats in Syria, most of the time they're people from Syria, and they give them
Yeah.
white hats and they say go do this. So it's not, yeah, it's, again, I have a
Again,
complicated
well-intentioned,
relationship.
right? They don't want to hurt. Really, they're not
Right,
like, they're trying to save lives. They're trying to do the right thing, but there's also a negative consequence that
right,
potentially is unforeseen if you're not aware. But that's
right.
uh
But, and I also want to be clear, this is being recorded and watched by people. So the UN also does things like provide education. So in the refugee camp,
long term
yeah, so that is an investment
human
in a whole
development.
human. It gets
Yep.
rough because it's really hard to be a student. Like we bumped into these kids. I think there was 4 of them. Talk about a tough situation. They hadn't eaten for days. They had no food, and they were at home studying because they had to pass their exams to get on to the next level. School is also very different in Kenya. Um, you don't. It's not just an automatic thing. Like in most of the time, you have to pay for school. So in the refugee camp, you get free school. That's a huge thing in Kenya. That there's nowhere else, no other way to get free school in Kenya. Well, there's probably some grants and stuff like that, but for the most part, so all these kids are studying, but these kids we're talking to, they didn't really know each other until they got to the refugee camp. They met at the refugee camp. They stuck them together because none of them had parents, because their parents are probably dead, and they're hungry. So now that kid has to be motivated enough to go to school and to do schoolwork and to study for exams. Now, in America, if we had kids with parents who didn't care or no parents at all, the odds of them getting their butts up and going to class and learning something are pretty low, to be honest. So, I mean, it would have been for me. I mean, if my
Oh
parents were
yeah,
like, I
it's
don't care if you go to school, I wouldn't have gone to school.
well, and I think you hit on a really key thing. Do you ever watch any videos by Bono? And
Yes.
he's big in the humanitarian, and he, controversially will say, probably the biggest lifter of any society has been capitalism and entrepreneurialism and equipping
Yeah.
people and getting the government from essentially being corrupt and stealing all of their productivity. He goes, we pretty much see there's a country where if this is the scenario, here's the way it goes. And if here's the scenario, this is how it goes. So he's really big on governments just being transparent and trying to end corruption, because as soon as you clean up corruption and people stealing from the producers and creating a system where people can actually do for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
that's human development. And then all of a
Yes.
sudden there's human flourishing. This is pretty much not controversial, which is why in general, we've seen this happen in the West. We've tried to not have scenarios where the government is corrupt. Now, when
Right.
we find corruption, it actually makes the news.
Right. And when we talk about like the U.S. government, we say, there is some corruption in it. I was kind of shake my head and go, man, you don't know corruption. Like yes, there is. Yes, there absolutely is corruption in the U.S. government, but it's nothing like it is in a lot of countries.
I just talked to a colleague. He's a criminal justice professor. He was doing a forensic electronics investigation of a large American company who was building a plant in another country. The only way that plant gets built is if you bribe the people of that country to allow you to build the plant.
Right.
So, but in the United States, we look at that and go, you can't do that. In fact, that breaks all kind of law, and you can't even be on the New York Stock Exchange now. But it's like, but this is the way the world works. There's a cost to doing business in that country, and it's called bribing the right people.
Yes.
And people, there's just, I'm guessing there's still a lot of people who don't believe what I just said, but come on, we're a global society, and this should be pretty well known at this point. In fact, I know people who do mission work. Bill goes to Dominican. he knows there's going to be a cost to get that container through customs.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's just part of the cost.
Yep.
Now, COVID, we know COVID's added another layer of corruption, because now you need another clearance, which means there's another person you have to bribe to get anything done. And thank God we don't live in a country like that yet, that I have to like bribe somebody to get something across the state line in Iowa or whatever it is. But that's I guess we are super spoiled and unaware here, I think.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
the way most of the world actually lives.
And I would say, like, it's important to note, there is, so like at some point we have to pull this to the gospel and Jesus, because I think that's our job. That sounds right.
Come on, we're just talking, but this is the thing about serving the least of these. I love Luke. You still, every time I hear blessed, right? Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. I'm like, that's you and me. That's us. We are the poor in spirit. We are the ones who are in desperate need. We are the ones who understand that we can't do anything for ourselves and that we bring nothing to the table. This is what a Christian is.
Right.
But unfortunately, this whole materialistic West, I don't know, blinds people to thinking like, oh, I have a nice house, so I must be an okay person. It's like, no, you're not.
So the world has taken everything and flipped it upside down. And what the gospel and the kingdom does is come back and flip it right side up. But if you've been living upside down for a long time, it feels weird. You're like, whoa, I'm upside down. Like, and God says, no, you're finally getting right side up. So the example here is, when we hear those things about blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, we go, that doesn't sound right. That is because we've been upside down this whole time. So it's starting to flip over. We have been talking about things like dependency, codependency, and the world will be, as you experience it, you go, no, they're hungry, I give them food. And but that's dependency, and that's bad. Like, no, they're hungry, I give them food, that's good. So that's why it feels weird when you start to flip it upside down and go, okay, but let's look at this with a different sense of reality. The next step is to look and say, okay, but the kingdom of God then behaves a little bit differently yet. Because the reason why dependency is bad, for a poor person to depend on people like you and me to give money out of the windows of our car and give food, that dependency is bad because it's not sustainable. It doesn't promote growth. It does, like, for all of the reasons we've already talked about. But then our dependency on Christ is different. Why is it different? Because he's God. Like, it is completely sustainable. I will run out of money before everybody is no longer poor. Like, I can't give to everybody. I can't feed all of the hungry. Jesus says, the poor you will always have with you. What he's telling us, in part, there's a lot more to that whole conversation, but in part what he's telling us is, we can't solve these problems. God can. As we try and solve them, we end up upside down and creating dependency and codependency, where what God does is go, how about we do this thing called the resurrection instead? And then nobody will be hungry or poor. He's got it. So then, when it comes to the gospel and our relationship with Jesus, there is a sense that dependency is good. Depending on Jesus is a really good thing, because he is sustainable, like, this unexhaustible resource.
The blood of Christ seems to still be atoning, and it doesn't seem to be exhausted.
Yeah. And as long as there's water, there's baptism. And as long as there's bread and wine, there's communion. And as long as there's people with voice boxes, there is the preaching of the word. So it is an inexhaustible. It's the only really inexhaustible resource, because it's not the stuff of this world. I touch on that a little bit for the message tomorrow for Thanksgiving. The sense that is, there's this inexhaustible, doesn't go away, doesn't doesn't ever come to an end, doesn't finish ever. It's constant, it's forever. Thanks be to God. That we can be dependent on, because when you're dependent on, when you're a person in a third world country and somebody digs you a well, a white man digs you a well, now you're dependent on that white man, and if he leaves, that resource is gone. When we are dependent on Christ, that resource doesn't go away, and it never does. It doesn't get exhausted. So I was trying to pull that in here to say, yes, the kingdom of God works this way, except in this one little part where we're not God, and because we're not God, it's okay, and in fact it's good. But that is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is what is sustainable, what is long term, what is a means by which we can do good that will bless for eternity. And that's why the component of charity that
The
always has to be,
imperishable, right?
yes, that is the text for tomorrow is 2 Corinthians 4.
Peter. Oh, okay. There's a couple occurrences. I wrote a devotion
Yeah,
yesterday with First
yeah,
Peter version of it. But yeah, this unperishable, undefiled, kept in heaven for you. This the resurrection, the idea that, and I think that's what. As soon as you have the dependent or this horrible relationship gets twisted, as soon as someone becomes dependent, and you cause this artificial hierarchy within the
yeah,
church.
yeah,
Okay, if you and I are brothers and sisters in Christ, we're no different. I am not better than anybody else, but
right,
I'm a white male Christian from the United States, and as soon as I start going down this path and I start feeling better about myself, I've hurt the church. I've hurt relationships. I've made myself something I cannot and should never be. And that's hard to admit, I think, especially since you and I have both done toxic and things. And
for sure,
but not. I'm trying not to be that guy anymore. And
right.
it's so much easier just to do toxic charity, though. Okay.
It's so much more convenient.
It is so much more convenient. So, okay, the ministry, the shoe that fits.
Sure, shoot. What, I don't know enough about it.
It's they do it in Africa a lot. It's a sandal that can be resized so it fits for a long time for a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of told me about that. So they ship whole containers full of these shoes over. They pass them out in the village. Everybody's really happy, except for the guy who sold shoes in that town. He's out of business.
Yep.
And all the kids who are starving to death, and they get home, their parents say, take the shoes off. We're going to sell those so we can eat.
Yep.
Okay. So I said, again, as soon as you start saying those things, people will be like, you're a jerk for even saying that. I'm like, but I'm just telling you, this is what people in Africa have told me. This is what can happen. Instead of partnering with someone in that local economy to bring these really high quality shoes at a price where they could actually make it a business model and everybody could afford them. Right. And you're working with the people that exist there, and they're the ones in charge of this. And it's part of the natural economy. The other one was these women need $5 to go to the hospital to have their babies. Give them $5. That's a perfect example that's in that toxic charity. No, they should be part of a health co-op. They should have, this should be beyond just their baby. They're going to need health care their whole lives. They need to create a system that's sustainable. And as soon as you, white man, throw $5 in there, you just sabotage the whole community's efforts to rally around each other to improve everybody's health care.
Right. Because why would you? Why would you spend
for saying that?
Yeah. Why would you spend the time and the energy to try and build something cohesive from birth through whenever, and then some people just show up with a truckload of cash and go, we got the first part covered. Okay, so now what do we do? And back in the day, boy, I can't remember how long ago it was, but I met this guy not that long ago, but he was from Australia, I think, but had married somebody in Kenya, and they had a farm, and they lost their farm because there was a famine or something, or food crisis, and the U.S. sent these shipping containers over with grain and food in it. And he goes, all of a sudden, he goes, how do I sell a crop of food when the U.S. is giving it away for free? So he lost his farm, and it was like, and it was like the family farm. It had been in this Kenyan family for hundreds of years. He lost the farm.
Well, and
So
that's the knock on our Iowa, right? This is what Central and South America are like. Your corn growers make corn so cheap that the rest of the world can't keep up because you're too technologically advanced. The price per kernel of corn is essentially zero, and the amount of effort we have to do to make up that income it's just not going to happen. It's great that we have lots of food and we can feed the world, and we even got leftover. We actually dump it in our cars. That's how much corn we got laying around. But there's also a negative consequence, that exactly what we're describing. I don't know. I hope this little podcast, for people who have not read these books, they become more aware, that they become, when it comes Giving Tuesday, that they might ask a few hard questions about that. Is it about human development? Am I doing it because of me, or is it for the person I'm trying to help?
Do your research.
Questions.
Yeah. Another one that drives me crazy are things like the Red Cross. If you look, how much of your dollar that you give goes to doing stuff, it's gonna be pretty low. And find out where that money goes, find out what they're doing with it, and then make your own decisions. I personally do not contribute to the Red Cross at all, because I don't remember what the numbers are, but it's a huge percentage goes to overhead costs of people having a job. Now, because it's hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever their budget is, they will show you pictures of things that they do. You research those, a lot of them seem just a little bit toxic. And I go, but with all of this money, and if you were investing in local things, it would be more effort on your part than it would be to show up and give money and do something quick in a crisis situation. It would be way easier, be way harder to do it right. I don't want my money to go to that. I don't want 10 cents of my dollar to go to helping
but
people.
You just, with that's a perfect illustration that brings it back again. They're a perfect organization for the crisis scenario, but not for the chronic issue. But do they have anything in their strategic plan to even distinguish between the two? And what does that look like? What capacity, at what level? How do they transition out of chronic or out of crisis into chronic? I don't know. Maybe someone from Red Cross could chat in here and tell us, yes, they do have an exit plan, or here's the transition plan. But this is where, I very selfishly, when I see a crisis scenario, I'm like, okay, I can just help with that one. Good. Okay, good. That's going to be not so toxic. I can just, and I can feel good, and we can help somebody, and then I can leave it alone. That's a very selfish approach, but I don't have to think so hard.
Well, it's not a bad thing. Like, so we had in Iowa this thing called a derecho that nobody knew about until it happened. Nobody had ever heard that word until it happened. So like, it's basically a hurricane in the Midwest, and it smashed everything. And so in crisis mode, go and cut trees down and move trees around that have partially fallen, and bring piles of food, because literally they couldn't get food to some of these towns because there were trees in the road and there was no power to refrigerate things. So they needed food. Like, this is all good, not toxic whatsoever. This is all good to do, great to organize, and great to serve in those scenarios. And the transition plan is usually pretty obvious. It usually starts with a big check from the insurance company that is going to, help you rebuild, and you rebuild what was already there. So those are no brainers. Like, tornadoes.
Well, that's why I wasn't feeling no consternation helping those few times this fall.
Yeah, no big deal. That's an easy one. It's just harder when it gets into those. How long has this been a problem? How long has this been going on? Those are the situations where we got to be a bit more careful. But, yeah.
Well, I thought this was relevant just because I'm just hearing all the. Tis the season to start, do your once a year charity activity, and unfortunately, there's a ton of organizations that know they can pull at the heartstrings of people, make them become aware of a crisis scenario that's probably really a chronic thing, but then they suck money out of people that are unaware. So I guess that's the purpose of this, just to bring awareness, to be careful, and to not hurt people, and to want to help them. This seems like a good thing.
I would say do your homework. Just do your homework. Should you be throwing money into the pot with Salvation Army, with the guy ringing a bell? I'm not gonna be the one who tells you you should or shouldn't. I'm the one who's gonna tell you you should look into the Salvation Army and see where that money goes, and then make your own decision. But if you're saying, yeah, but I just feel like now is the time to be giving, and I want to, so that's about you. Okay, so if you really just need to feel good about yourself, go take that money, go get a massage. You'll feel great. Buy a nice bottle of wine, or do whatever. Whatever you need to make you feel good is fine. Do that. There's nothing wrong with feeling good.
All right.
Do not.
Hold on.
Okay. So I'm solo. So here's what I'm telling you. Do not do something for somebody so that you feel good, because it's worse for them. And that's what you're really, hypothetically trying to do, is help a person, not yourself. So if not giving to the Salvation Army, or not giving to the Red Cross, or not contributing to this or that, if it really is about you not feeling good, don't do it, because it's not good for them. You're not actually helping, you're hurting. The title of the book is When Helping Hurts. You're lucky. I can carry that all by myself. I'm good.
Good job. My wife needed an envelope. So, no, I appreciate this. I would encourage people to, even if you Google it, and I don't know if it's in the recording, whatever, but it's like the idea that listening to those who you're actually helping, subordinating yourself to them. I don't know. And it all kind of ties together, as far as I like the fact that we brought, like, even within relationship boundaries. Mm-hmm. So I have a young man in my house. He's 19 years old. So he's really excited to move out of my house, becoming less dependent upon his dad, which is what he should be doing. He's been completely dependent most of his life. Now he's actually able to earn some of his own money and go to college and buy himself his own stuff. And so he's transitioning away from this dependency scenario so he can be independent. Again, this is a situation in America where it is a sociological phenomenon called extended adolescence. We have people in their 20s and 30s and even 40s who are still dependent upon people that they should not be dependent upon. Right. For some reason, this has become a sociological phenomenon where it's acceptable. Not in my house, but right. But you and I both know people who are in these scenarios, and
sure.
It says that's even in the book, Boundaries. It's like, mom and dad come and say, my son's got this problem. He's on drugs. He doesn't want to leave the house, blah, 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 blah. And the guy's like, your son does not have a problem at all. He's perfectly fine. He's doing exactly what he's been taught to do. You guys are the problem. You just,
exactly
again,
right.
It's toxic charity is what it ends up being. So it'd be so much easier if there wasn't sin and brokenness and problems with ourselves and others. But like you said, I think Jesus in the resurrection cures all these ills. But as we right now, as Christians in this world, how do we proclaim and live out the gospel in a way that doesn't hurt? I think it's harder. It's harder than ignorance was bliss. How's that? And now I'm not ignorant, so it's not as blissful.
Yeah, exactly right.
Thanks, Luke.
You're welcome, man. All right, I should run. I gotta make sure the kids haven't started a fire or something.
All right. Well, we'll do this again. Maybe next week we could do it like
face
together
to face. Wouldn't it be weird?
It's so weird. It's gonna be amazing.
All right, dude. We'll talk to you later.
Later.
Bye.